Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, one more time. Good morning. Good morning. Just want to, before I get started, I just want to pause for a moment. Look at this. We're together. Pretty amazing. Very, very excited to be here in person with you. So welcome to Brave Spaces 2022, Rochester's third annual Summit to End Hate, but the first one that we get to do in person. I'm Karen Elam, Executive Director of the Levine Center to End Hate at the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester. 3 years ago, we had a vision for an event that would bring together adults and youth from across the Greater Rochester region to examine what was driving increased expressions of hate and explore ways to work together to address our divisions. We decided to call our event Brave Spaces to acknowledge the need to engage in courageous, fearless conversations. As we know from the news headlines, it's more important than ever that we come together to learn, dialogue, and act to address the ongoing rise in hateful rhetoric and violence. I'm so glad we have the opportunity to do so in person today. We recognize how important it is to empower youth, so we're delighted to have over 50 high school students from city and suburban districts attending sessions today, designed by the Levine Center's Youth Ambassador Council. Now, before we move into the program, let me go over a few housekeeping items. Please silence your cell phones. Restrooms are just outside the auditorium, behind the pavilion where we walked in, and across the hall from the ballroom, which is at the other end, and you'll eventually get there. You'll find index cards in your program where you can write questions for our keynote and closing speakers. Please hold those up when you're ready, and the staff person will collect them. This is a little anticipated, but please be sure to sit at your assigned table for lunch. So on your folders, it will tell you the number of your table. And if you're in the ballroom for a breakout session, you don't need to sit at that assigned table, but just please be sure to get there at lunch. I'd like to thank the elected officials who are joining us today. Assemblymember Harry Bronson and Assemblymember Sarah Clark. I want to make sure I did not miss any other elected official. Those are the two we knew of that could make it. I know it's very hard. We appreciate it.
Councilwoman Freeman from the town of Warren.
Those are the Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. It's also my special honor to thank our very generous sponsors, JP Morgan Chase, M&T Bank, some of whom are here today, Vincent Peabody, Jewish Family Service, who's CEO with us today, and Shirley Powell, many of whom are here with us as well. We're grateful not only for your financial support, but also for your commitment to engaging in the difficult conversations that are needed to cultivate unity in our community. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Marilyn Mayo. Ms. Mayo is an expert on extremism with over 25 years at the Anti-Defamation League. Founded more than 100 years ago, the ADL is a global leader in combating anti-Semitism, extremism, and bigotry wherever and whenever it happens. Through a moderated discussion, Ms. Mayo will help us to better understand the roots of extremism and extremist groups, how hate manifests itself, and how we can combat it. Ms. Mayo, welcome to Rochester.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and especially to be here in person. As Karen said, we've had a hard few years doing everything online, and it does make a difference to be here in person. So before Karen and I had our conversation, I wanted to give you a sense of the Center of Extremism, where I work, and what we do, And just to tell you, when 3 years ago, when the pandemic started, we had 15 people at the Center on Extremism. We now have over 40. And I think that gives an indication of really what we're seeing in terms of increased extremism. So just to tell you what we do, we look at extremism across the ideological spectrum. That means we look at all kinds of extremist groups, from right to left. And our goal really is to monitor, expose, and disrupt extremist threats. And we do this both on the internet and on the ground. And it's important to understand that it's not just online. And obviously online is a very big issue, but a lot of online activity leads to real-world events. We also provide resources and training to law enforcement and to community groups and to tech companies. And the idea, again, is to talk to them about emerging trends and threats. And as Ken said, ADL's been around for over 100 years, and we've been looking at extremism for most of that time. But the Center on Extremism officially was formed in 2006 to consolidate all the work that we do on extremism. So I just wanted to give you an idea of where our information goes in terms of the Center on Extremism. You can just see in this slide that we give information to all different groups, or share information about extremism, and really it is about extremism. We provide information to these different groups: law enforcement, intelligence agencies, tech, civil rights groups and NGOs, community partners like folks here today, to Jewish institutions, and to the media. And I often talk to the media to give them context for what's going on and what we see every day. And then this is just like a sampling of the different kinds of groups we look at, just to give you an idea. And by the way, it changes all the time depending on what's going on in the world and essentially in the communities that where we see extremism. And I mostly focus on the United States, but as you might understand, there is interaction between extremists here and abroad. So I do work with other organizations that do similar work to ADL abroad, and so we can share information and try to stop extremist threats. So this just gives you an idea. You can just see it, from white supremacists to anti-government groups to left-wing extremism and to anti-Muslim extremists. Just again, we look at all those different types of extremists. I wanted to give you a resource that you can all use. It's something called the heat map that is on our website, adl.org. It stands for hate, extremism, anti-Semitism, and terrorism. And what it allows you to do is to look at the map and choose your state, and then within your state, your city, and see what kind of extremist activity has happened there. And you can actually find out what's going on in your community. And that is my last slide, but I wanted to say also that our website, really has a tremendous number of resources if you're interested in finding out about extremism. We have backgrounders, we have blog articles, we have all sorts of material that would be helpful in understanding extremism. So thank you.
So I'm just going to start by repeating that as you're hearing Marilyn answer the questions that I'm going to moderate, and you think of questions, please jot them down on your index card. We'll collect them and get to as many as we can. So Marilyn, I'm going to go off script right off the bat, because in those blocks of different groups, I saw Odinists. What are Odinists?
Well, Odinism is like a pagan beliefs that many white supremacists believe in, and it has like Aryan symbols and ideological beliefs, and so some white supremacists actually think of Odinism as their own religion, and it promotes Aryan culture, Aryan symbols.
Great, thank you. Can you explain Aryan for some of us that may not totally understand?
Okay, well, gosh, Aryan. Aryan is a term that has been used to describe white people, and it's something that we see white supremacists use that, to claim that term. There was a group that some of you may remember called Aryan Nations, which was a neo-Nazi and Christian identity group. Christian identity is another religion that white supremacists have adopted, and that's a religion that basically says that white people are the chosen people and all other people are mud people and not worthy of not worthy of being recognized. But so Aryan is that term that has been adopted by white supremacist groups to promote white, what they call white culture. So,
okay, thank you. So the last thing that we saw was ADL's heat map. As you said, that stands for hate, extremism, anti-Semitism, and terrorism. Can you go into a little bit more depth as to how that map can be used?
Sure. So just to, I talked about the 40 people at the Center on Extremism, and what you should know is that we have investigative researchers, and they're responsible for looking at different activity across the nation. So ADL has 28 regional offices, and so our investigative researchers will look at what's happening in their respective areas. And then we also have researchers who focus on particular areas like anti-Semitism or, I mean, there's just so many different kinds of areas that we look at. We're looking, because there's been so many hateful attacks on the LGBTQ community, we're looking at that, all sorts of different kinds of hate. So that information that we find out is input into this map, the heat map, and if you go on the site and you plug in heat map in our search, you can find the map, and again, you can click on a state, you can, and within that state, you can then click on a city, and it goes by year, and you plug in the year where you want to find out what's been happening, and it lists all the extremist activity that has happened, and it lists all different kinds of incidents, and you can just go and see what's happening in different places across the country.
So drilling down specifically to here, we saw that the white supremacist group called Patriot Front committed several acts of hate in Rochester over the past several years. Can you tell a little bit more about the group, their history, how they recruit, their recent activity?
Yeah, Patriot Front is responsible for most of the white supremacist propaganda that you see reported around the country. What's really both interesting and alarming is that the person who leads the group is very young. He started leading the group when he was a teenager, believe it or not. And the group emerged out of the Unite the Right event that was held in Charlottesville in 2017. That was a seminal white supremacist event that involved white supremacists from all different types of groups, like the Klan and neo-Nazis, and also these groups like Patriot Front that don't look like what you expect extremists to look like because they wear khaki pants and polo shirts, but they are white supremacists. But that group emerged out of another group called Vanguard America. I probably don't have to give you all this history, but the important thing about that, the reason I mention it is because someone from Vanguard America, he was the person who took his car and rammed a bunch of counter-protesters and killed a young woman. Patriot Front emerged because of that incident. They wanted, the members of that group wanted to kind of separate themselves from being known for that, so they formed Patriot Front. And the group uses, their idea is that they say that their ancestors, their European ancestors, conquered America and that this country belongs to them. And they want to create a white ethno-state. And they are very, they basically appeal to young white men. They do that by working different groups online, networking, and they've been very, very active. It's not, I can't say exactly how many members they have, but when they show up at different events, they have a sizable group with them. And the group is, they focus on using symbols like the American flag with the idea that they'll appeal to a wider audience, like, you know, like conservatives is what they talk about. So it's a group that is, it's just very, very active. And one of the newest things that they've been doing is showing up at, for example, anti-abortion rallies, and also showing up to protest against the LGBTQ community. So whatever issues that they can seize upon to, you know, make themselves, their presence known, and maybe try to attract people, that is one way that they try to attract people and recruit, and they also do it online.
I just wanted to take a moment to point out, because I don't know if everybody in this room knows, that the Levine Center to End Hate was founded after what happened in Charlottesville. To give you a very brief history, Todd Levine, who's the president of the William and Mildred Levine Foundation, approached the Federation after that event and said, I can't get my head around the fact that there were neo-Nazis marching on a college campus in the United States of America in 2017. As I say to people, in 2022, we look back at that and think, well, look what happened on our Capitol in January 6th of 2021, right? But there it was. And really, he had the vision, the foresight, and came to us and enabled us to create what has become the Levine Center to End Hate. So just wanted to share a little bit about how that connection is made and how that came about. So Marilyn, again, staying very close to home, closer than I think any of us would like. 5 months ago, there was an attack at a, excuse me, a top supermarket in Buffalo, and 10 African-American shoppers were killed. The 18-year-old man that committed that crime, that horrendous crime, wrote a manifesto where he described himself as an ethno-nationalist, as you're saying, and he voiced support for the far-right Great Replacement conspiracy theory. Now, I will say that we have Dr. Lizardo, who's going to be talking more in depth about Great Replacement theory next, but just to touch on it for the whole group, could you tell us a little bit about the theory and how it connects to anti-Semitism?
Sure. So the Great Replacement theory, I have to say that there have been different iterations of this theory throughout, you know, certainly the history of this country. But the most recent iteration, and by that I mean like the most influential iteration of this current time, comes from a French writer actually named Renaud Camus, who wrote an essay in a book called The Great Replacement. And in that, he talked about immigrants coming from both Africa and from Muslim countries replacing white Europeans. That essay and book really influenced white supremacists around the world. So in general, I'll just say what the Great Replacement theory says is that whites are being replaced by non-whites through immigration and through other social, political, and economic means. But there are different versions of the Great Replacement theory. Renaud Camus did not really talk about Jews when he wrote his book. He's, in France. However, there are many people who use the Great Replacement theory and talk about it and really focus on anti-Semitism. They say that it's the Jews that are responsible for bringing non-white immigrants to the United States. This came to the forefront like when Robert Bowers went to the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. He went there. Right before he went, he posted on a social media site that, the Jews are bringing these immigrants. I'm going in. I'm going to do something about this. So it has, and the theory was also behind the person who killed over 50 people in New Zealand at the two mosques. Also the person in El Paso who killed, almost 24 people at a Walmart because he hated Mexicans. And then, of course, the Buffalo shooter also was influenced by the Great Replacement. Those three people all named the Great Replacement. They mentioned that term in their manifesto. And I have to say that one of the things, and it's a very disturbing trend that we're seeing, is that one extremist murderer influences the next. And if you look, for example, the Buffalo shooter, 23%, almost a quarter of his manifesto had exactly word for word what was written in the extremist murder in New Zealand and what his manifesto. And then about 63% was basically the same, and the same ideas, that it overlapped in terms of ideology. So this is something we're seeing is really influencing extremists to take action, and they feel that if they carry out these murders, that they'll be seen as a hero for saving the white race. And you know what? They are in the white supremacist world. So we've seen after these shootings, even, and I want to mention Dylan Roof too, who killed a number of African Americans at a church in South Carolina, that all of these young men, and they're all young men being radicalized online, they thought they would be a hero, and then they are made into a hero in the white supremacist world. Well, we'll see the pictures of memes of them, with, angel halos and things like that. It's awful. So, yeah.
So I think there's a correction. You mentioned El Paso, and you said 2,000 people.
No.
I thought I heard in 2000? No.
No.
Okay.
I don't remember what I said, but Okay, I'm not sure exactly why I said that, but no. In El Paso,
it was a small. It was.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure exactly how that came out. I wasn't aware of it, so I'm not saying 2000, but that happened in 2019, and I think I said 24. That's what 24.
I heard 2000.
That's what I said.
Okay.
They killed almost 24 people.
Thank you.
I'm glad I could remember what my brain said. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
No problem.
It's my hearing and not what you said.
It may be my Brooklyn accent coming out. So,
I just wanted to also, again, put another caveat, and I don't know if everybody is aware, but the shooter in Buffalo was also looking in Rochester. So I don't, I'm not a person that wants to fearmonger, but really the intent, largely in having Marilyn here, is for us to make ourselves aware, and that's something I think that's really important. And I'll also, and this is not to put a plug in for your boss, but the CEO of the ADL wrote a book, Jonathan Greenblatt, called It Could Happen Here, and it was very eye-opening. I recommend it, and it's not all, it's sort of doomy gloomy at the beginning, but he does also give us some hope, which we will also talk about. But again, I just think it's important that we be aware that these things are happening around us, which is why we're so grateful that you're here to talk to us. So, Marilyn, can you talk a little bit more about what the Center on Extremism's research is, and why it's critical for the layperson to understand domestic terrorism? Sure.
So I've mentioned, the work that we do at the Center on Extremism, and I think that, obviously we're trying to prevent extremism from happening, which is difficult. But I will tell you that in doing our research, a lot of my colleagues do a very deep dive online, let's say, and we have discovered people who are planning extremist acts, and we've been able to stop those acts. It's happened a few times where we see that and you're thinking, why would they post these pictures online talking about, showing their weapons and talking about what they're going to do? Well, they do it. They're young. They want the recognition. They want attention. And our job, now sometimes they don't use their real name. That's something they're aware of. Don't use your real name. So what they do is, but they have clues. And I'll give you an example that was amazing. There was a young man, his name was Climo, can't remember his first name, but he was talking about targeting the Jewish community in Pennsylvania. And he posted a picture of himself putting a sticker on a kebab house in Pennsylvania. Well, one of my colleagues is from Pennsylvania. He recognized where that was. And what this young man didn't realize is that he had a badge on that got reflected in the picture, and we were able to blow it up. And it was a pool that he visited, right, that he would go to. In any case, using that clue and a bunch of other clues, we were able to figure out where he was. And we of course, we contacted law enforcement because he was planning a violent act, and they were able to figure out who he was. And we were able to stop him from carrying out an act, and he was arrested, and they found enough evidence to arrest him with weapons. So the point is that domestic terrorism is something that can affect all of our lives. You never know, like you talked about Buffalo, you never know when something will hit a community. And it's not just violent acts, it's also intimidation. It's also, bigotry that's directed at communities that does affect the whole community. And so, it's really, domestic terrorism is defined in different ways, but, obviously, what I mean by that is like, we don't have an act in this country a domestic terrorism act at this point. So it hasn't even been defined by the government. But the point is that we know that we have to stop extremism and terrorism when we see it. And that's why we do the work we do. And that, because we are trying to make an impact. We are trying to inform communities. We're trying to inform the media and other groups about what's happening with the purpose of trying to stop it. And that's what's important, trying to stop it.
Absolutely. So you said something a little while back about the fact that unlike the white supremacist groups that we might be familiar with, the KKK that wear robes, et cetera, that, or wearing, having a shaved head and wearing leather jackets with hate symbols, now more and more of these hate groups are working on blending in to the mainstream. And as you said, wearing the khakis and the polo shirts like we saw in Charlottesville. Talk to us a little bit more about the consequences of these hate groups becoming more mainstreamed.
Yeah, I think one of the trends also that we're seeing right now is the mainstreaming of extremism. And I'll give you a really good example of that. I mentioned Patriot Front, of course, we were talking about, but there's another group called the Groypers. It's a play on a meme that was created around this symbol called Pepe the Frog. Some of you may know this. It was like basically exploited. That was taken. I'm trying to think of the right word. Co-opted by extremists. So the Groypers are led by a young man named Nick Fuentes, who dresses in a suit and tie, and he was at one time he was a student at Boston University and part of a conservative club there. But he is a white supremacist. He's very racist, very anti-Semitic. But he claims that he's a Christian conservative and that he uses, that the things he says are done in humor. And this is one of the, again, things that we saw emerge when the alt-right, or the alternative right as they called themselves, came into being in like 2015, 2016. This idea of using bigoted humor as a way to, claim that they're not what they are, and also to recruit young people, because young people really find humor actually, fun and interesting. So, getting back to Nick Fuentes and the Groypers, every year they hold an event at the same time that CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Conference, holds its event. They hold it in the same place at the same exact time. And what happens is they invite elected officials, right-wing elected officials, to come to their event. And we have seen in the last 2 years a number of elected officials go sometimes right from CPAC to this other event, which is called the America First PAC conference. And what is dangerous about that so much? It's normalizing hate. It's making hate more acceptable. It's saying that, first of all, there's a graying line that we're seeing right now between, what's extremist and what's more mainstream. But it's really normalizing hate to a point where people don't even object. And as a good example, when these elected officials, and I'm not mentioning officials just because we're a 501c3, so I don't want to talk about candidates or anything, but when they went, there was no real reprimand for their showing up. And years ago, there might have been. But we're finding that there just isn't at this point, and that this kind of melding of people who call themselves Christian and conservative, and who are really promoting white nationalism, and that this is happening more and more.
I'm going to take a pause to remind you that if you have any questions, please make sure that you use your card. I see one here. Chaz, are you able to collect some of the cards? Just hold them up, and we will try to get through as many as we can. Thank you. Okay, Marilyn. Let's talk about social media and hate. So we are seeing social media used as a recruitment and organizing tool in acts of domestic terrorism and hate crimes. In many cases, young men, as you pointed out, who are radicalized in a matter of months through this process. What can you tell us about the how youth are targeted online?
Thank you. So, that's obviously, social media has had a tremendous impact on the extremist world. And I've been working in this field for 25 years. And when I first came to ADL, I had a computer, but no internet. So you could imagine how much things have changed. And we see that, for example, white supremacists, there are two different ways that we find that people get radicalized, and there's probably more than that. But one is where people go on, especially the chans, the 4chan, for example, and other sites where there are discussions going on. Or Reddit is another example, and they'll get involved in discussions. And a lot of times, young people want to belong. They want to feel like they have friends out there. And you'll have someone from, who has white supremacist ideology talking to them and, getting to know them. And in that way, they'll kind of move them into those ideas. And that is one way that we're seeing that. On the other hand, when you look at someone like Dylan Roof, who carried out the mass killing at the church in South Carolina, he went online and he started reading information from the Council of Conservative Citizens, which is a group that's not very active anymore, but it was a group, don't let the name fool you, it was a white supremacist group that was based out of the white citizens councils that were formed in the 50s and 60s to fight desegregation. So he went online and he started reading and about from different sites like the Council of Conservative Citizens, American Renaissance, and other white supremacist site, and got influenced just by what he read online. And the same thing with John Earnest, who shot people at a synagogue in California. He got radicalized in a matter of, I think it was 5 months, he said, in his he wrote a very short manifesto. Again, he went online and started looking at different sites and doing searches, and decided, I have to take action because they're saying that white people are being replaced, and there are things that I need to do to address this. So there's a lot that happens online, where young people are just influenced by what they're reading, or they'll do searches and they'll get influenced that way. But it's a community where you can find just about anything. And unfortunately, that there's another area too that we know that white supremacists are reaching young people through gaming sites. And again, it's just a matter of reaching out to people that you're meeting online and trying to influence them. So it's a difficult situation in terms of trying to stop that kind of interaction, because it just happens, in someone's home while they're on the computer. So, or even on their phone now, right? So.
Thank you. Clearly, you all don't have any questions.
Wow.
You can see me over here playing cards, not literally, but Thank you. These questions are incredible. Obviously, this is striking you. So we will get to as many of these as we can. I know we can't get to all of them, but we will get to as many as we can, and possibly after find ways to respond to you. Let me continue, and I saw another hand up when somebody gets a chance here. In July 2022, the ADL reported that Twitter, quote, did not remove over 200 blatantly anti-Semitic tweets accusing Jewish people of pedophilia, invoking Holocaust denial, and sharing oft-repeated conspiracy theories. What do you feel that social media platforms should be doing differently when it comes to hate speech?
A lot. Unfortunately, we've tried to work with social media companies, and we do. And one of the things that there are two major things that we think that they should be doing. One is that they should have more people monitoring what's being put online, right, or what's being posted, and also train them, because a lot of the people that are employed to do this may not understand that something is hateful that we know is hateful. Like, for example, a good example is Holocaust denial. They may not understand what Holocaust denial is. So they need to train people to monitor their content and take down posts that are hateful and extreme and, promote violence. The other thing is to be transparent about their about how they operate their sites and how they decide what can be posted and not be posted. One of the things that researchers have been asking for years is for these media companies to be transparent about their policies and about their methodology for addressing hate, and they're just not. They're just not. So those are two things that we think that they really need to be doing. Unfortunately, in terms of even taking people down from social media sites, it's not that effective a lot of times because they just create another account under a different name. Or we've seen after the insurrection on January 6th, there was a proliferation of new media sites. Now, they're not as successful, but numerous extremists have joined them. And then there's a site like Gab, which was created before January 6th. But Gab is a haven for extremists. And it's not, not only is it not monitored, but the person running it is an anti-Semite and very, vocal about it. I'm talking about Andrew Torba, who runs Gab. So I think, it's a situation, there are free speech issues, but when speech becomes hateful, and it's not a First Amendment issue because these are private companies, right? So it's not like the government interfering in what people are saying, which is what the First Amendment is about. These private companies have both have an obligation to protect people online, and they should be doing more.
I'm actually going to jump to a question here because it's a great follow-on, and I will, just to make sure people know, anti-Semitic or anti-Semite is anti-Jewish, or it's anti-Jew, it's Jewish hatred, just so that it's clear. How can we prevent online radicalization as online citizens? I love that question. Especially, how can we fight bigoted memes successfully?
I wish I had an easy answer for that, but I think that one of the things that's important, if you see something online, do report it, because even though it's frustrating sometimes that social media companies don't respond as much as we'd like to, they need to know what's out there. And so that's one way you can do something. Most social media sites have a mechanism for reporting hateful content. They don't do enough, but they do have that mechanism. The other thing is that it's really important, I think, to teach critical thinking skills. And I say that in terms of younger people, to know what they're seeing online, because there are many different ways of attracting young people, and memes is one of them. And so in terms of keeping hateful memes online, it's really difficult because they're created all the time. So again, one way is, I think, it's important to not add to the proliferation by, circulating that meme, which which most people wouldn't do, but sometimes people send them around to show them, and then they get, they somehow just get circulated even more. And I think that it's so, reporting is one, and kind of letting, not taking these memes offline is. It's just not realistic. It just can't happen easily. But not letting the people just. I'm having a hard time finding the right words, but basically we need to be aware that this is a way that attracts young people because they like memes. Memes are really fun, and maybe talking to young people about. Content of memes, and even though they may be funny, that they still affect people because they have hateful content.
So staying with the speaking about youth, there's a question here. How do you suggest that public school teachers help their students to understand extremism in a community that is in opposition to teachers teaching social justice topics? It's tough.
Wow. Yeah, I really have a lot of sympathy for teachers right now because they're getting from all ends in terms of what they can and can't teach. This is another difficult question. I would say that the thing I talked about before about teaching kids critical thinking skills is super important. In other words, giving them some kind of skills to kind of understand for themselves what they're seeing, like to discern whether it's true or not. What makes that really difficult, of course, is that one of the things we're seeing right now is the proliferation of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracies. And I think that that's another area that, it might be helpful to talk about about conspiracy theories. Now, in terms of social justice, obviously we know that the right, and particularly the far right, they've seized upon critical race theory. They're calling teachers groomers who even mention the LGBTQ community. And I think, and we're seeing school boards, basically, people are joining those school boards to prevent anything from being mentioned around race, around, different gender issues. And I think the way to address that is for people to get involved in the community and support education, support teachers. There are lots of communities that are banning books to speak out against that. There are librarians and teachers who have tried to actually speak out against that, and they need support. And those of us in communities, we can't be complacent. We need to also be actively supporting, teachers and educators and people who believe in, in social justice. We see, like, especially in the far right, I should say, media, that talking about race at all it's considered un-American or unpatriotic, or that you're talking about critical race theory. It's just not true. But we're fighting a battle here against these proliferation of these conspiracy ideas and this misinformation and disinformation. So get involved in your community and in your school boards and supporting teachers.
I just want to underscore that. I couldn't agree more. Supporting teachers, supporting your educational institutions, their administrations, really, really critical at this time. Because they are really doing yeoman's work. It's beyond, it's really beyond the pale at this point. So here's a question that came up. There are two, the question is, what is Black nationalism? And there's a separate one. Please speak more about why Black nationalism would be identified as extremist on the list.
Okay, so when we talk about Black nationalist groups, we're talking about groups that, it's the same as sort of like the opposition to white nationalist groups that promote the idea that whites are superior. So black nationalist groups, and I don't deal specifically with that area, so I'm going to parse my words a bit, but it's groups that promote, again, like black nationalism, where the idea is that, I don't have a really good definition, I'm realizing that as I'm talking, but it's groups that basically promote this idea that black nationalism or black culture is superior. They're usually anti-white, they're usually anti-Semitic. And so, and I'm trying to, there's like an example might be not the original Black Panther Party, which was not a black nationalist group, but the new Black Panther Party, for example, would be a group that's black nationalist. And what was the second part of the question?
Just why they would be identified as extremist on your list.
So it's the same, again, and basically I just said it, it's because they are, they do promote anti-white and anti-Semitic views, and we call extremism wherever we see it. And it doesn't matter which group it's coming from. There are also, and I'll just say this, there are Jewish extremists as well, right? And they have not been active, but I've been around a long time. We used to monitor the Jewish Defense League, which is an extremist Jewish group. So I think that, and whoever asked that question, please see me afterwards and I can come up with a better definition of black nationalists. It's just that I don't deal in that area so much. So but please do come to me and I will get you that information. But that's why we include, again, as I said, we look at all groups across the ideological spectrum. It doesn't matter to us where the extremism is coming from.
I think that's the key, right?
Yeah.
It's where there's extremism,
yeah.
right? Where there is hate. Doesn't matter who the group is that's doing it.
Yeah.
You're identifying if there is
yeah.
violent rhetoric, violent actions against other
Yes,
people.
Exactly.
Right. Great. Okay. So I wanted to mention, I don't know if people here know, and I don't know, is Jill Paperno here? Jill. So I'm going to call out Jill for a second. So some of you may know that the Reawaken America tour tried to come to Rochester in August. And I mentioned Jill because Jill really was the person that got a bunch of us together and formed a committee to oppose that tour coming to Rochester. I think it was really, for me, it was such a moment of recognizing the power of community. To be quite honest, I don't think we thought we'd managed to get it canceled. We thought we would at least draw people's attention to the fact that we, as a community didn't want to have that kind of hateful event here. So I think I could say we were kind of pleasantly surprised that it moved, and yet, unfortunately, it was whack-a-mole. It went down the road to Batavia, and we weren't able to help them to cancel it there. Anyway, I bring that up because there is a question. What do we know, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm going to throw it to you. What do we know about the Reawaken America tour that wanted to partake in Rochester's at the Armory? And also, what do we know about QAnon?
Yes, I can answer that question, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
So, the Reawaken America tour, this has been going on since it really started happening after the January 6th events. And the tour is done by a person named Clay Clark. He refers to himself as a Christian entrepreneur. The reason I bring that word in is because he tries to take these tours to churches across America, and they're often held at churches, and he tries to involve pastors in hosting these tours. Now, these tours bring together a lot of different strands of the far right. They basically bring together election fraud deniers, COVID deniers, anti-vaccine COVID deniers. They bring together, again, pastors who are more to the right, who believe that, progressives or the left or the Democrats are evil, socialists, communists, and they need to be defeated. And they also bring political candidates together. All these groups are together. And what we see that, at these conferences is basically speaker after speaker, and he has like a cadre of speakers that appear at these conferences. And they include a wide range of really conspiracy theorists. And just to name a couple of people who are very popular on this tour, Mike Lindell from MyPillow, who's one of the biggest purveyors of election fraud. Michael Flynn, former national security advisor under Trump, who not only has he promoted election fraud, but he is going around kind of promoting what people are calling Christian nationalism right now. And Christian nationalism is sort of it means different things to different people, but he's basically promoting this idea of a Christian nation. And one of the themes, the most recent theme of the Reawaken America Tour is the Great Reset. The Great Reset is this idea that officials were using the pandemic as an excuse to install a totalitarian regime. And the anti-Semitic version is that Jews are behind that. So this tour has been going around all over the country. They attract hundreds of people. It is actually a successful tour. And it's really of concern because the main thing that they are promoting is this idea that the country, that the election was stolen, that the country is in a state of civil war where people have to take action because evil forces are taking over the country. So this is something that unfortunately is gaining ground in certain communities, and it is of tremendous concern. So QAnon. I'm sorry, I didn't answer about QAnon. Let me just finish. So QAnon is a conspiracy theory that basically says that a group of pedophiles, which includes members of the Democratic Party and other well-known figures, are kidnapping children and drinking their blood, and basically that these are evil people who are globalists. And there's an anti-Semitic theme there, if you know about the blood libel from years ago. Although I wouldn't say that everyone who believes in QAnon is anti-Semitic. There is that underlying theme, about the kidnapping children and drinking their blood. And also the idea is that Trump will come through as a hero, and he does play a big role in the QAnon conspiracy, and will arrest all these pedophiles, throw them in jail, and that'll basically save the world. But QAnon is a serious business because we know there are numerous people running for office right now who won their primaries who believe in QAnon. And so this is serious, and it's a conspiracy that has gained ground even among people that you wouldn't normally think would believe in QAnon, like health people in the health field. Who started talking about QAnon, and they used this campaign called Save Our Children, which is a common campaign, but they used it to say that this is what was going on and the children needed to be saved.
So they're using that kind of language that, of
to,
course, we
to
would all want to
people.
save
you
children.
You want to save children.
Right.
But of course, the children are not being kidnapped and their blood, being, drunk, yeah.
Right. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. Chaz, I saw your 5-minute mark. Now we're at 2. I'm good. So in 2 minutes, it's not a lot. I'm going to combine some questions. I want you to know, Marilyn, that at least 2 people are concerned for your mental health. One said, how do you sleep at night? And the other said, how does this work impact your own mental health? So I'm not going to have you answer that, even though we care about you, but I am going to fold that into talking about what we can do, right? Like, what are the things that we in this room can do to address hate and extremism? And I want to point a specific question that I really appreciated. Somebody, I'm assuming a young person, said, what can I do? Well, yes. What can I do? How are you stopping hate groups? And what can I do as a queer female in high school? So I threw a lot at you, but maybe you can answer some of what we can do and thinking about.
Well, thank you for being concerned about my mental health. But I I will tell you that there are two, and I'll get to the second, but I will tell you that there are two things that help me sleep at night. And one is that I work with an incredible group of people. And honestly, like when you're working with incredible people who are all working to prevent extremism and to have an impact, that actually is, you know, it makes me actually feel like at least I'm doing something. So what can people do in general? Well, first of all, I think it's extremely important to develop relationships with different groups in your community. And I think that's happening here today. That's great. But we can't be isolated. In other words, you know, communities are being targeted and, you know, marginalized communities. And we really have to, like, support each other. You know, I know, like, when we were seeing tremendous anti-Asian hate in the country during the pandemic, you know, ADL teamed up with the Asian community to stop hate. We're doing the same with the LGBTQ community right now because there's so much hate being directed against particularly transgender people, and it's alarming. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is hold your leaders accountable. Hold them accountable. If you see hate in your community, speak out against it, because what we've seen is that extremists come to a town, but if someone speaks out against them, you know, and says, well, you're not welcome here, if members of the community are very, you know, vocal about that, they don't come back. They're like, oh, that community wasn't really receptive to us. So really, you really have to, like, speak out and hold community leaders, you know, accountable for what they say, and also that they should speak out when something happens in a community or something hateful happens. And I think that, you know, developing relations, speaking out, making sure that you yourself are, I'll just say this, like, I find kindness goes a long way, even in terms of people who don't believe what you believe, because that's what's happened in the country. There's so much polarization. People are in their bubble, and, you know, it's so easy to get angry, but I think, like, kindness goes a long way. In terms of the young person who asked what you could do, I think it's incredibly important, again, to, you know, have allies and build up, you know, relationships with other people from your community, from other communities, and make sure that, you know, you, when there's something hateful, that it doesn't just sit, you know, that you actually speak out against it. And it's very fearful when you're on your own, but when you create allies and, you know, and speak out together, that's super important. And I think that makes much more of an impact. So.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking Marilyn Mayo.
Thank you.
Okay, so we ran over a little bit, so I'm going to get in trouble with my staff. Those of you that have a session in here are lucky. Those of you that have to go to the ballroom, please go very quickly to the ballroom for the session that starts in 1 minute.